Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tour All the Python Things, where I'm going to take a little bit of a tour of some different tools you can use in the Python ecosystem with Sauce Labs. I'm Josh Grant. I'm a solution architect at Sauce Labs. I've been working at Sauce Labs for 2 years. I've worked with a bunch of customers that use Python. It's my language of choice. So in between all of those lovely Java frameworks that everyone seems to eventually work with, I get to work with Python. So a little bit about myself. I have this lovely image of me, nice colorful picture of me, from an artist. I live in beautiful Toronto, Ontario, where I'm going to be talking to you today at a virtual conference. And I've been working in test automation for about 10 years. I've worked with Java and Selenium. I've worked with Protractor in Node.js with Angular front ends. I've also built API level test frameworks in Python. And like I said, Python is my language of choice. So a little bit about Python. Well, Sauce Labs loves Python. A significant amount of our infrastructure is written in Python. It's historically kind of been a dominant language at Sauce Labs. So of course we love it. Just how Sauce Labs is built. As well, Selenium, the Selenium project first class. So the Selenium bindings are available in Python. They're a first class member of that ecosystem. There are Appium bindings as well in Python. So if you're doing some kind of UI-based testing, there's a rich set of tools that you can use in Python. Plus, it's a great language. It's easy to learn. A lot of colleges, universities are starting to use Python as an introductory programming language. The University of Toronto, which is a big deal around here, they're doing that now in their kind of well-known computer science program. So that's all I have to say about Python in general. So let's get into the meat of the matter. A question that I get on occasion is, what would you recommend? So to build a test framework with, or what kind of test tools do you recommend? And sometimes I get that, what kind of Python tools would you recommend? Sometimes I get a general question. I've had it from individuals who are like, my team is new to test automation. We don't know what to do. What would you recommend? I've had that from more experienced developers and more experienced testers who have specific issues. Our app is built in X and our backend is built in Y, and we have specific company-wide issues. So, what would you recommend in that case? In any flavor of this question, I am very happy to help. I'm very much happy to help and give some suggestions. Broadly, my opinion has kind of been, last thing. If you'd like to follow along, I am going to have some code samples. I'm going to have some code samples of the tools that I'm going to show. They are runnable. They are executable. There is a channel in Slack, tour all the Python things with this link, but you can follow along if you'd like to read and write code or execute code. You can take a look at it. So very, very broadly, there's two main test tools, or kind of test frameworks, if you will, in Python nowadays. So the main one is PieTest, and the other one is Robot Framework. So in my time at Sauce, these two make up effectively 100% of all the test automation that I've seen. Teams using test automation frameworks in Python are going to use one of these two. There are other ones out there. People use unit tests by itself, or people use Nose, or there are some other fringe tools, if you will. But these are easily the most two mainstream. And if you're going to press me and say, okay, well, out of these two, which one would you pick? And if I had no other context, I would say, obviously, I'm going to recommend PyTest. It's very idiomatic Python. It's relatively lightweight. It's easy to get up and running, writing unit level tests, or even like API or browser level tests. It's not to say Robot is bad. Robot I would also recommend, but if I had to choose one of the two, I would prefer PyTest. So why PyTest? It's a widely used test package in the Python world. It's gained a lot of traction. It's relatively mature. It's taken care of a lot of sort of edge cases or kind of fiddly bits with it. It's widely used. It has contributions from people at Mozilla. It has contributions from main core contributors, which make it pretty stable. The other key thing about PyTest is that it provides both code tools, so like tools for writing tests, and also a command line environment for executing tests, which is actually a really, really cool feature because you can then break up those two things. So you can use PyTest simply to execute tests, or you can use it to write and design test code, or both. Right? A lot of people use it for both, but you can separately use it for one or the other. And lastly, there's a really rich ecosystem of PyTest plugins for doing lots of different tasks that commonly, excuse me, a little dry here. For a lot of different tasks that commonly come up when it comes to test automation. Also, so on occasion, I'll talk to people and they'll say, you know, this one team is still using Nose. If you're using Nose for some reason, you can execute those tests with PyTest. It could be a drop-in replacement. Instead of using Nose tests to run those tests, you could use PyTests. That would be the very first step I would take. And if you run into issues or you have bugs with that, you can iteratively kind of fix as you go along. But just keep in mind, Nose is dead. It has been dead for a while. It's actively no longer maintained. It hasn't been actively maintained for many years. It's dead. It's pining for the fjords. So, should I be using Nose in 2020? Absolutely not, is what Myra Rose would tell you. You should not do this. If you are actively using Nose, you need to yesterday have a migration strategy to get away from it. PyTest is the natural choice. There is Nose too. I haven't looked into it. As far as I know, the original maintainers of Nose recommended migrating to PyTest. That's what I would suggest nowadays. I really hope there's some Schitt's Creek fans out there and people aren't just thinking I'm some lunatic. Anyway, let's take a look at some code samples. So I'm just going to show a very basic sample of, let me just make sure I have my questions handy. So this is a very basic code sample of kind of a unit style test. I have this class. The class is an item counter. Maybe it's used in some kind of e-commerce application just for keeping track of the number of items in a cart. And I've written some tests along with this. So here's a few things to note. One is I don't have to do anything special in terms of imports or formatting. I don't have to import any constructs from PyTest. I don't have to use any sort of base test class. So if you look at these tests, they're not even in their own class. They're just functions. They're simply functions in a file. And that's by design. So if I run this test, I'm going to show the PyTest runner. So PyTest, I've previously installed. PyTest test unit. Runs super quick. 3 tests were found. So PyTest, the only construct you need to remember is it will look for this test underscore starting definition. So if you have either methods in a class, or preferably if you have a list of functions in your Python tests, then, then PyTest will find those functions and execute them in the order that it finds it. So here I have some very, very simple unit tests. They just verify, like if I start with my total of 0 and I initialize, if I add an item, does it go up to 1? If I add and remove items, does that work? So very, very lightweight. Not a lot of constructs or structure you need to follow, and that's by design. So PyTest is very lightweight, and its test runner is very straightforward to use. So I mean, that's the kind of the nice part about PyTest. Now we're at SoftCon. Like I said, Selenium is a big deal. I've worked with Selenium quite a bit. So let's see what a basic test might look like using PyTest and Selenium. So, and I'm going to use Sauce Labs in this case. So basically, I'm going to go and hit this Sauce demo. It's a basic demo application, kind of like a e-commerce type application with items you can add to cart. And I'm going to import this concept of a PyTest fixture. So a fixture in PyTest is kind of a conglomeration of setups and teardowns. The idea is that this is kind of a meta programming thing, and I can create a browser object or browser instance and just pass that in as kind of a mix into my tests. So here I have my setup. I set my capabilities. I set my username and password, or username and access key. Hit the Sauce remote URL. But this all would apply. Like if I'm using just a local Firefox instance or a local Chrome instance, it would all work exactly the same. I just wouldn't need all these constructs to hit my remote grid. So I set up my driver. I hit the app under test URL. I yield my driver, and then I driver quit. So the yield keyword here is really interesting. You can think of it as a return statement that doesn't break the flow. So this function is going to basically return this driver instance, but also continue executing. And PyTest will magically kind of handle this. It's really nice. And here are my tests. So these are pretty straightforward, pretty easy peasy Selenium-based tests. I want to verify that the page title is correct. I want to verify that if I try to log in with no credentials, I get an error. And I want to verify that if I log in with the standard user and secret sauce set of credentials, then I've logged in and I can kind of see the shopping cart. I've logged in appropriately. So let's try running this. So PyTest, basic Selenium. It's going to take longer than like about, a fifth of a second because it has to hit, Sauce Labs and go over the wire. But my tests are running and they're passing. So again, it's pretty lightweight. Like you get a nice separation of fixtures versus tests. I can reuse this fixture. I can put it in what's known as a conf test.py file, which is kind of a central construct at the top of your project. So I can reuse fixtures across files, across directories. But for simplicity, I'm keeping this all in one file just to see. So this is nice. So this is, I get my browser object, I can use it in my tests. Everything's handy dandy, right? So PyTest overall is pretty good. So let's take a look at some ways we can kind of iterate on this idea. Like what are some libraries or utilities that are out there right now in the wild for PyTest? I'm working with Selenium and Sauce Labs. Both of those examples. So let's talk about NeuroDia. So I like NeuroDia. So NeuroDia is a Python port of the water library from Ruby. Water is really, really interesting. So I'm not really a Rubyist, and I learned about water a few years ago from Titus Fortner, who is a colleague of mine and really smart guy. The light bulb moment for me was when I learned that water wasn't just a competitor of Selenium, but it actually used Selenium, and it wrapped the Selenium WebDriver around some utilities or some kind of functionality that made it really suitable for test automation. So water does some really neat things that make for really good test automation strategies. These include synchronization. So automatically in water, as with NeuroDia, which is the Python port. So NeuroDia will synchronize your actions. So it will automatically wait until an element is clickable, wait till it's visible. It will wait until like the DOM is finished rendering, all those sorts of things before it interacts with an element, before it clicks, before something happens, which adds an element of stability to tests, which is really great. NeuroDia and Water also provide a really friendly API. So instead of just depending on find element and only find element with like various locator strategies, you can define elements. You can define specific elements like text elements or buttons with really nice locator strategies that are really clean syntax. And lastly, you can, and to me, this is like a really key thing in a lot of test frameworks, you can decouple your element definition from where you use it. So if you've worked with Selenium for as long as I have, you you eventually get those stale element exceptions or something where you call a find element when you're not supposed to, or you define like an element up here in your test and then use it down here and then something wacky. So NeuroDia can help with this situation. So let's take a look at what NeuroDia looks like. So comparing this, so we're going to compare these kind of these Selenium-based tests against NeuroDia. So NeuroDia does use Selenium under the hood. The setup is very similar. I'm creating this browser object, and I'm passing in this remote WebDriver to instantiate it along with the desired capabilities. And this is what my test looks like. So right away, you can see that it's a slightly different flavor of syntax. Like there's slightly different semantics. Instead of using find element to find elements, I can define like a text field. I can define a button, and I can use pretty straightforward approaches to locating those fields. So like I can use a class name, I can use CSS by default, which is nice. So this encourages good locator strategies and readability of code. Also in this test error, this is the kind of what I mean by decoupling an element definition from usage. So I can define my element here. So browser text field with this class name. And then I could do like, lots of, okay. Whoa, boy, too much Java. Okay. Lots of logic here. So I might have some complicated thing or I have to import some data or something, but then I can still use that element here. So let's run this test. Should get exactly the same output as in my basic Selenium test. But where this really, this might seem like kind of some trivial thing, like, yeah, okay, that's great. But this means you can define really minimalistic page objects. So you can just define a bunch of elements in a class, import the class, and then just click away or do things with it. So that's really helpful. Water has a lot of really great practices from a browser testing automation standpoint. And I think NeuroDia is a really faithful port of that. So it's a really cool project. I've contributed to it. I did not write it. Lucas Tierney did that. Really smart guy. So really great tool here. And again, like if you're using Selenium anyway, you can start a NeuroDia session from a Selenium WebDriver session. Oh no, a failed test. The demo gods are against me. That's why you never do live testing. This was working. Like it's kind of crazy. This was working like hours ago. Anyway, I'm gonna move right along. So that's NeuroDia. You saw the example there. So let's take a look at PieTest Selenium. So this is a different approach. So like I mentioned before, there's an array of PieTest plugins for all sorts of test automation tasks with PieTest. One of them is PieTest Selenium. So this is a really great plugin. And it was initially written by some folks at Mozilla, Dave Davidson, David Burns, I think had some work in there. So these are people who really know what they are doing, working in Mozilla, Python shop, some people heavily involved in the Selenium project. So smart people. Two things that this plugin provide are idiomatic fixtures. So off the shelf, you get some fixtures for PyTest. So you don't have to write your own fixtures. You can leverage the fixtures that are provided to you by this package, this library maintainer. And also it adds some additional options you can pass into the PyTest CLI. So this is another cool thing about PyTest having both the runner component and the test writing component, is that they can interact in kind of interesting ways. So let's take a look at how PyTest Selenium, might accomplish this task. Yeah. Whew, lots of questions. Great. Love it. Love it. Terrific. Okay, so I'm just going to show this. So here are the same tests. So these are basically identical to the basic Selenium case. They're all using this browser fixture, and the syntax is exactly the same as like your basic Selenium setup. Here's the interesting part. This is the fixture for using the browser. That's it. That's it. This is it. So this Selenium fixture is provided by the PyTest Selenium fixture plugin. And the interesting thing, I mean, first of all, look how clean this is. This is like 2 lines of a function. That's amazing. And you're good. Secondly, via command line now, you can control specifically which browser you're using, and if you're going to use like a local instance or like a browser, like a cloud-based instance, like Sauce Labs or one of those other ones we don't care about, which is really, really cool. So I mean, if you go back here, one of the flaws, if you will, of this code I've written is that I've hard coded my browser options. So I have to use Chrome and I have to use Sauce Labs. What if I want to run this locally on Chrome? I can't do that easily. I'd have to go in and change my code. It's not that nice. With PyTest Selenium, they've got you covered. So I'm just gonna do this. All right, PyTest, test PyTest Selenium. Oh, and of course it doesn't work because driver has to be specified. So what I would do here, now I get to provide this custom option driver, and I'm going to pass in Sauce Labs. And bear with me for a second, I'm also going to pass in option called variables. I'll get to in a moment. The idea of variables is that it allows you to pass in a JSON formatted file as basically configuration options. So now I'm running this on Sauce Labs, and at runtime, I can choose which configuration I'm running, and I could even choose something like, well, I want to run this locally, so I'm going to use Chrome, and it's just going to look for my local instance of Chrome versus like my cloud-based instance. So, I mean, this is pretty cool. It wraps up a lot of complexity. You get this nice, clean interface, and you get a nice, accessible command line interface as well. So the last point I want to make, so this is interesting. This is a really great approach, especially since the maintainers of PyTest Selenium, know how to handle different situations like switching browsers or passing in arbitrary configurations for your browsers for Selenium. And they've packaged that in a way that like other people can leverage. You could also, and I didn't do this, but you could also take this Selenium fixture, this value, and you could wrap that into like a NeuroDia instance as well. So you could combine these two things together. You could get this nice, this nice package for writing and maintaining browser interactions with Selenium via NeuroDia, and make use of this really great PyTest Selenium plugin for good command line environments. So that's pretty fun. That's pretty fun. So yeah. So other PyTest plugins. So I did mention PyTest variables, which allows you to pass in a JSON configuration file at runtime. So and that applies to more than just Selenium. So I mean, if you have other test automation that depend on a configuration. Maybe they have to target a specific server environment, or they have to pass in a specific config file of lists, or if you're doing localization, internationalization, maybe you choose a language or locale. Like you could use PyTest variables for that. PyTest xdist is for running tests in parallel. Basically, it allows you to split up your tests in a mostly intelligent way. Oh, I'm really behind time. Oh boy. And then we also have PyTest mocking. So we're going to move on because I'm kind of running a bit on time. And I will answer these questions toward the end, but I just want to get through this. So robots. So kind of switching gears a little bit. Popular test-driven framework. So robot takes a different approach. Robot is a keyword-driven framework. So the idea of robot is that you have robot test cases, which are English language or human readable test cases. And then you have definitions for those keywords. So robot is a really good approach if you're interested in BDD. It kind of fits in nicely. It's sort of in contrast to Cucumber or other BDD type automation tools. But the idea is that you kind of define your own keywords and you can rearrange those keywords in any order you want to kind of form test cases. And there's a huge array of keyword libraries for doing lots of different tasks. So for example, there's a Selenium library for Selenium-based with Selenium-based keywords you can use to build up your tests. There's an Appian library for Appian-based testing and Appian-based keywords. There's lots of other different libraries. So another thing I want to point out, as far as I know, robot tests cannot be executed by PyTest. So PyTest can subsume nose frameworks, or if you're using unit tests, Python unit test, you can use PyTest for that. You can't really do that for robot. So, I mean, it's a bit of a breaking point, and it's one reason why it's somewhat of like an either or when it comes to PyTest or robot. So let's take a look at the robot file. So this is where you can define the test case. And like I said, it's in a human readable markdown format. This is helpful too if you want to collaborate. So if you're involving a business analyst or a product owner or like someone who isn't necessarily like a test automation specialist, they can write test cases in a very natural way, kind of human readable and in a very straightforward way. And then the nice thing is that, or one of the things that I think is super cool about robot compared to Cucumber, for example, is that your keywords can be written in either using existing keyword libraries, existing robot files, or you can use Python directly. So you can kind of have this split of like, here's what your tests look like, and you could have like a Python programmer write definitions for your keywords. It's kind of interesting. So let's take a look, and I'll show kind of to go, I guess, a little quickly. And I'll show an example of keywords using existing robot files and existing keyword libraries. And the idea here is that libraries will give you kind of base keywords, and then you can build custom keywords out of those keywords. But you can also write your own keywords in Python. So if you're a Python programmer like myself, you can basically just drop down a level of abstraction or go up a level of abstraction, I don't know, and just write in pure Python. And you can just define your keywords. Really, really cool feature is that if you write your definition of keywords as functions in snake case, in kind of a standard Python snake case, it'll automatically translate that to like sentence-like casing. And kind of handle capitalization and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of nice. So let's take a look at what this looks like. Close all. So we're going to do. Okay. So here's a test case written in Robot, and this is using the Selenium library, or the previously known as the Selenium 2 library. So I import my resource robot file here, which is in the same format, but you can see this is a nice markdown-esque format, right? You have like settings here with some documentation strings. You have test cases defined here, and then you can define each test case, starting at the beginning of the line and then indenting here. So a single indent or tab or 4 spaces will define like a keyword, like a step in your robot test case. And you can also mark, like there's special markers for setup, tear down, other things. So here I'm opening up my page, logging in as an invalid user, verifying like, did I get some sort of error button element, and I'm ending the session. And if I take a look at how these keywords are defined, I can define them in the same format. So I've imported my Selenium library, which provides robot keywords. And I'm able to make use of those keywords to define higher level keywords. So I'm able to use input text, click button, open browser, and I can define things like open the login page based on this URL, or log in using these credentials, log in using these credentials, right? And I can I can take my kind of basic steps of like, click this, enter this text, do this. Oh my goodness, I'm like really, so I can do that. Lastly, so same kind of robot file for my test cases. And here I've defined the same thing in pure Python. So I can define keywords here using this keyword decorator provided by Robot. And I can define keywords like this. So title is correct, open. And here I can use pure Python. So here I'm using the WebDriver Python bindings, but I could use whatever I want. If I had another, if I had some sort of Pythonic approach, I could just do this in like plain Jane way, very conventional. So you get a nice split there. And I cannot believe I went as fast as I did. So that is it. So questions. And I'm going to escape out of this. Stop sharing. All right. Okay, so some questions. I'm using unit test. So this is from Vladimir Saluski. Sorry about the name. I'm using unit test out of the box. Python. I'm using unit test, the out of the box Python package for my team. Is PyTest much better? I would say yes. So PyTest provides a lot of functionality that unit test doesn't, like things like fixtures. The runner is very nice. Like it provides a lot of formatting options, at putting to JUnit XML, like these sorts of things. So if you're doing like a full-on automated project, yes, I would definitely recommend taking a look at PyTest. But also keep in mind that if you've written some tests using unit test, you might be able to just use PyTest directly to execute those tests. So it's not necessarily a huge jump. You could just start by using like the PyTest test runner. Can you please share that? Yes, I can share the GitHub link. And I'll share it in the chat. And I worked with UI testing, Selenium Behave and Robot Framework. And it's an awesome language. Oh, love it. Wow, this person's done more work than I have. Jeez. Okay. So good on you. You've like covered all the bases, like API testing, Robot Behave. I haven't used Behave. If you're a Behave lover watching this, please find me and shower me with your wonderful knowledge of Behave. But like I said, I've mostly worked with Robot and with a majority of PyTest. Oh, and this is a good question. Do you think that Robot is better over BDD or PyTest BDD? Yeah, we'll talk about it in the chat. PyTest BDD is really, really cool. It's a PyTest plugin for writing BDD. But the cool part is that you don't necessarily have to use BDD. So it allows you to write Gherkin-esque feature files and execute tests via those feature files. It's a really cool project. But then the fun part is if you decide, you know what, I don't want to use these feature files anymore. I don't want to use the Cucumber style. I just want to use PiTest directly. Like you can easily go from BDD to non-BDD while maintaining your PiTest stuff. So like I think that's really compelling. But it's a neat project. It's a really neat project. Yeah, and Susie is, so I'm wrapping up. Thank you all so much. I hope it was a good talk. Please join the channel, tour all the things. The GitHub link will be there. I will post it again in that link, but thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun.